Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, audiophiles and music lovers. In this video, we'll be talking about some of the special technologies that I saw at the Capitol Audio Fest in Washington, D.C. I hope you enjoy it. In this video, I'll be reporting on something a little different from the product introductions I focused on in Part 1 and in Part 2. Let me explain. While I was at the show, and of course I've had this thought before, it seemed clear to me that there's a standard high-end audio model. What I mean is that certain technologies have been voted on by the people and now represent much of what is on display. Let me give you some examples. First, and most commonly I think, we have loudspeakers with forward-facing cone drivers in a cabinet. We also have a lot of solid-state Class A/B amplifiers. We have digital streams from Qobuz or Tidal. I could go on and on, but let me just say, etc., etc., there are some fairly common things, and when you go to 35 or more rooms and look at a lot of equipment, like I did at Capitol Audio Fest, you tend to notice that there's a pattern. I also talked to a number of audiophiles who were going around the show, and some of them voiced the same thought. This is a good thing to a point. It allows refinement of these technologies to a very high degree in what is a really relatively small industry. It's a good thing because markets usually coalesce around decent price performance answers. It's a good thing because it allows investment in a supply chain that has some certainty of demand and ROI. But the possible issue here is this. Some unconventional ways of approaching audio may have a hard time getting up to critical mass. Since unconventional means are not per se desirable, the issue comes when those unconventional means are needed to move the state-of-the-art forward. I think, it's the hypothesis I'm going to be talking about here, that we may be at such a point. So I thought I'd approach this show with a particular question in mind. That question is, do I hear or hear of new technologies or low market share technologies that might be a key to future progress? In this video, I'll review some of those new technologies and some of those old technologies that I think might be keys to future progress. This material is therefore somewhat speculative. It's not intended to declare that some different technology is the answer or the future. It's intended to give consumers some possibly new thoughts about technology that they might investigate further. Again, I'm not judging that these technologies or breakthroughs are ready for prime time. Of course, I think they might be, or I wouldn't be presenting them to you, but I'm just not in a position to declare an answer that lies in the future sitting here today. I want to bring them to your attention so that you can do the judging. And I think new or distinctive technologies are, quite frankly, interesting and fun. So I hope you do too. Okay, let's go over some of my technical highlights from the Capitol Audio Fest. First up, we'll start with the Theoretica Applied Physics Bache processor. I'm starting with this amazing device because it helps to start at the beginning. And at the beginning, I think, is a common fundamental misunderstanding of the issue with stereo. I'll try to keep this simple. For more detail, check out Andy Quint's review of the Bache processor, and stay tuned for my upcoming coverage of the Bache for Mac software version. Also, check out my previous review of the Linkwitz speaker, because it has some related thinking going on in it. Okay. The issue with stereo. The sound space we hear from stereo is not what it could be. You probably know that or have sensed that, but I just want to say it because it's the issue I want to talk about first and foremost, and that the Bache processor tries to address. The late Siegfried Linkwitz described the issue being that our experience, and hence our objective with stereo, seems to be to create a miniature soundstage in between the speakers, where miniature performers are playing. I should add, this objective, as maybe limited as it is, isn't exactly easy to achieve. Because we often get miniature performers, but they're playing inside the left or the right speaker. So the problem here is that we get stuck, or could get stuck, and I think maybe we have gotten stuck, with improving a good but imperfect model of the sound space. Linkwitz, who started professional life as a Hewlett-Packard radio frequency scientist, and Edgar Schweikert of Theoretica, who is director of the Electric Propulsion and Plasma Dynamics Lab at Princeton, have thought hard about how to address this issue. Maybe we should replace the phrase "it's not rocket science" with "it's not audio engineering" to indicate problems that are simpler than the really challenging stuff, and to remind ourselves of how hard audio engineering at the state of the art actually is. Anyway, in reading some of their work, Linkwitz and Schweikert work, it strikes me that a fundamental common denominator of their work is a borderline earth-shattering, yes, earth-shattering if you care about high-quality music reproduction, idea. The earth-shattering idea, in my words, not theirs, is that the data to place the performers in a realistic sound space is on the stereo recording already. The work of the stereo system is to not screw up this data, or it is to correct screw-ups that are inevitable in the way stereo was laid out way back in the 1930s. Let me contrast that view of the data is there and we've got to get it to you with common assumptions. One common assumption is that the stereo equipment in your listening room is critically responsible for additively creating a sense of spaciousness that's missing from the recording and therefore needs to be enhanced. Linkwitz and Schweikert would say that's wrong. They say the data is on the recording already, you just need to get it to the listener in proper form. Another sometimes common assumption is that to really get the sound space right, you would need a multi-channel recording and playback system. Again, these scientists, Linkwitz and Schweikert, say that stereo can get much of the job done and, very importantly, in practical terms, they're engineers after all, do a better job than multi-channel. In any event, most of recent musical history is encoded in two-channel recordings, so it also would be preferable if we could work with those. We're not getting Cream or Bernstein back to do new recordings. I, personally, don't want to lose those recordings, and I don't think you do either. I have the entry-level Bache processor on review right now, but I stopped by the Theoretica room at Capitol Audio Fest to hear the big Bache processor set up by Dr. Schweikert himself playing through Jansen speakers. My system at home has Theoretica's head tracking customized to my exact listening position and tweaked for my head shape. Yes, that matters, but listening to the generic version of the Bache processor and its basic assumptions about head shape and listening position at Capitol Audio Fest still produce some of the amazing sound spaces that I hear at home. What are we talking about when I say amazing? The generic Bache can produce an image of a performer at 90 degrees left or right, well outside of the speaker positions. Remember, if you're sitting with essentially an equilateral triangle setup, 90 degrees is very far outside either of the speaker positions. The Bache can also place performers pretty much anywhere in between, so at least in this hemisphere is what I heard on the generic version, and if you have the software tailored to your particular head shape, you can actually go even beyond that. But the performers are placed pretty much where the data on the recording says they were when the recording was made. Meaning, it's not randomly placing a performer hard right or hard left. It's placing the performer there because that's what the data on the recording says was the location of the performer. Again, I want to emphasize this is using absolutely standard stereo recordings. A simple explanation of what the Bache processor does is easy to say, but not so easy to understand. The Bache cancels certain acoustic crosstalk signals that were not in the mic feed, but are automatically added when played back via two speakers in your room. Remove that crosstalk, and you hear something very much like what the mics heard, which is why you can reproduce the performers where they were in the recording studio or on the stage or wherever the recording was made. On demo, the result is almost shocking, especially if you come into the demo with the idea that stereo is set up to present an image spread between the speakers. Your reaction, or at least my reaction, is generally, how does it do that? And if you don't also have the idea that the data on performer location is already on location, you think the Bache processor is additively faking it. Not so. Just want to say that again. Not so. I'll expand on this in upcoming pieces, but the Bache software may be a key to a better future presentation of sound space that is dramatically different than what we're used to right now. Okay, the next technology I want to talk about is an oldie, but maybe a goodie. In the Audio by Oz room, a new speaker was on demo, the Vida Nuda horn loudspeaker. This is a primarily not fully horn design, with horns for the lower mids and upper mids and treble. Accompanying these two drivers are an active cone woofer and a super tweeter. The industrial design is also interesting in that the speakers, while large, are not super tall, so they don't take over the room as much as traditional wideband horns do. Anyway, the Viva horns were, naturally, driven by Viva tube amplification. They produced a really dynamic sound on a variety of large-scale classical music pieces that I heard, and that does make you wonder if the magic of horns is something that should be studied more. When I say the magic of horns, I mean the frequent sense horns give of realistic dynamic transitions, much of which is in the microdynamic or the mid-dynamic realm. Not everything is metal or Mahler. Though, to be clear, this thought applies to Mahler's macrodynamics too. Horns in the old days were often derived from 1950s designs because that was when we only had low-power amps and had to have high efficiency. Materials technology then wasn't even close to what we have today, nor was measurement technology, and we have vastly bigger amps and better psychoacoustic science. So it's interesting to contemplate what modern horns could do. The Vivas may be a good example of a technology that the people voted against 50 years ago when the tech was limited and the high end was tiny, but which could now work if only it could be developed. I'm hopeful that companies trying to move the ball downfield, like Viva and some others, get increased traction. Just a brief interruption for some exciting news. AudioQuest has 3 new rack-mountable PowerQuest models that take AudioQuest's comprehensive approach to AC power conditioning, addressing noise linearly to provide class-leading wide bandwidth noise reduction at better than -22 dB. The PowerQuest line starts at $459.95 in the US for the PQ303 and goes up to $1299.95 for the PQ707, which includes transient power correction with up to 45 amps peak on-demand power for any amplifier. Visit audioquest.com for more information. And now, back to the show. The next technology we want to talk about are active bass traps and room treatments. One obvious problem that I've discussed previously at Capital Audio Fest was bass. Actually, having measured many real rooms, I would say that one problem with most rooms is bass. Rooms have walls, rooms have domestic dimensions, and this means they have bass resonances that create peaks and dips and blur in musically important regions, like 50 to 150 hertz, very commonly. While being bugged by the resonances of hotel rooms, little did I know, von Schweikert was showing the new VR55 Mark II speaker with their upcoming bass trap system. I'm probably massively oversimplifying, but Damon von Schweikert explained that they have designed a pair of separate woofers, not, I say not, to create low-frequency extension, which the VR55 doesn't necessarily need, but to be placed and operated to function as active bass traps. That means the active version of the VR55 Mark II will have an upgrade that can tame some of the inevitable peaks caused by room dimensions without overwhelming the room with visually obvious treatments. The bass in the von Schweikert room was about as clean as I heard at the show without seeming rolled off. I believe von Schweikert's intention is to offer this active bass trap system with multiple models. The von Schweikert active bass trap system should be available in the first half of next year. Of course, it's not completely finished yet, so pricing is TBD. On this same subject, I've recently reviewed the PSI AVAA C214 active bass traps, and they work too. So I'm optimistic that this is a technology that could gain momentum, partly because it helps with a real problem, and partly because it fits with real living environments. I didn't actually notice the von Schweikert active traps when I entered the room, for example, and the PSIs are super easy to hide in a corner of the room. I had them behind a chair. Another related example of hidden in plain sight technology were the NEMESIS diffusers. When I went into the Estalon and Dartzeil room, I noticed a picture on the wall of the Beatles. I thought, oh, that's a nice touch, thinking it was just a big dramatic photo. But nope, the Beatles were printed on the acoustic surface of the NEMESIS panels. These are designed to work at low frequencies, as are all bass traps, but NEMESIS says they're focused more on diffusion than absorption. In the event, the bass was better controlled in this room than in most of the other small hotel rooms. Maybe the NEMESIS panels work. Next is the Larsen Model 9, which isn't really that easily summarized. I got to hear it in the Dr. Vinyl room. This is an interesting speaker that tries to solve a problem that almost no other current speaker in the high end really aims at least not in the way Larsen goes about it. In simple terms, the Larsen Model 9 tries to remove the influence of the room on the sound. There are multiple ways the Model 9 does this. First, by requiring a specific placement in the room, which is against the front wall, but away from the corners. The drivers seem scattered about the speaker with only a tweeter really directed toward the listener. But this is not randomness. Larsen is trying to get consistent output across all frequencies, what you might call constant directivity. By placing the speaker against the wall, bass is no longer omnidirectional. I think it has a quarter sphere radiation pattern if you just think about it logically. And the speaker boundary interference response is eliminated, or at least moved up to a high enough frequency above where the woofer operates that it really doesn't matter. The mid-range is angled to create a very early reflection from the wall behind the speaker inside the Haas window so that your ear integrates it and doesn't hear it as a reflection. Then there are 3 tweeters, 2 aimed up and 1 facing forward. This complex system is designed to create uniform power response in the room. The placement of the speaker aids this goal and is intended to move many reflections either inside that house window or way outside of it, so as not to confuse your ear and brain. My listening time was brief, but these speakers have something attractive going on. They also sound really different. First, performers don't seem to come from the speakers, rather they're in the room. Second, my listening position was not at the apex of a triangle between the speakers, as I would normally prefer with conventional stereo. And yet, the sound profile seemed balanced and was somewhat like sitting toward the side of a concert hall. I was off to the side, so it was like being off to the side of a concert hall. That's not my preferred spot, but the sound was still enjoyable there. To summarize, these are speakers that must be played in a position that does not take over the room, and they require few or no room treatments. Their sound can be enjoyed by listeners outside the sweet spot, which means more than one listener gets at least pretty good sound. Robert E. Green has reviewed the Model 9s for the Absolute Sound, and we'll put a link to that review in the show notes, and you can find more interesting technological and listening thoughts there. The next technology I want to talk about was embedded in the Diptyque 140 Mark II planar magnetic speaker. Fidelity Imports demoed a new Diptyque speaker. Diptyque uses push-pull, dipole planar magnetic drivers. I'm speculating here, but it would appear from my listening that the push-pull approach allows for enough excursion to extend the bass into the 50 Hz or lower range. That might not seem that impressive, but as a reminder, bass is hard with dipoles because they naturally have a bass roll-off below a frequency that's set by the baffle width. This roll-off has to be compensated, and that compensation requires more and more excursion. At some combination of low enough frequencies and high enough sound level, you reach an excursion limit, and you reach it faster than with many traditional cone woofers because of the compensation you have to apply. The Diptyque 140, like the larger Diptyques we heard at Expona, delivered satisfyingly balanced mid-bass with good dynamics. The rest of the frequency range sounds pure and smooth. While it's not a small speaker, the shorter stature of the 140 might also make it a fit with more living rooms. That's enhanced by the fact that you can get it in a multitude of colors, and it's just, I don't know, to me, kind of an interesting shape. This is an impressive speaker, and at $25,000 seems potentially quite competitive with the cone drivers in a cabinet speakers that are around that price point. Part of my thinking on why it's competitive comes from comments I made at the beginning about the problem of stereo. Linkwitz was quite clear that constant or nearly constant directivity is an element of equipment design that helps render stereo sound space more true to the data on the recording. Fundamentally, the changes in directivity that you have in a typical speaker are a clue to your ear-brain combination what the source of the sound is. That is, the source is the speaker. Dipoles are one way to get closer to constant directivity than what is generally occurring with cones in a cabinet, as I said. A typical cone speaker, just to remind you, will have omni-bass with more energy directed forward at the top of each driver's range. And then we go back to something that's closer to omnidirectional, and then the radiation pattern or power response tightens up. A dipole comes closer to having a figure-8 radiation pattern at all frequencies. The weakness with dipoles tends to be the bass cancellation or roll-off effect that I mentioned earlier, which has made it hard for dipoles to appeal to listeners who like the bottom few octaves to be realistic. Like everyone? You could get around that with very large panels, but that's unacceptable or impractical for many. Or you could add a sub, But then constant directivity goes out the window. Hence, the Diptyque 140 is exciting because it brings the controlled directivity idea together with satisfying bass that upsets room modes less than traditional speakers. I hope we have a chance to review these. Bache Audio was demonstrating their 002 loudspeaker. A semi-unconventional design, the 002 features an active 10-inch woofer with a bass level adjustment. A level control hardly seems like a breakthrough until you consider that large variations in output, below 100 Hz especially, are experienced in real rooms with real seating positions. To me, it practically defies logic that the low-frequency output of a speaker should be held constant in all of these different environmental cases. But most speakers and most electronic stacks do not allow this adjustment. In the 002 is crossed over to a 10-inch paper cone midwoofer. The main driver is an 8-inch bamboo fiber mid-range tweeter, which is run without any crossover. To support frequencies above 10K, a Substack super tweeter is used, and the super tweeter also features a level control. The goal here is to create a high-efficiency speaker with somewhat controlled directivity. Rated at 96 dB at 1 meter, the efficiency of the 002 is high enough to allow the use of SET or other low-power amplifiers. Bache demonstrated the 002 with a 15 watt per channel Alexis Audio SET amp. The sound was nicely dynamic with good balance and nice imaging. I was surprised at the smoothness of the response in the sweet spot. This speaker made me wonder, again, about the potential for high sensitivity, as with horns, and controlled directivity, as with horns or dipoles or omnis, to mix dynamics with spatial accuracy. So if you could have really good dynamics and spatial accuracy, that would be a wonderful thing. And to fully exploit the dynamic possibilities, it'd be interesting to test speakers like these with bigger than SET power. The Bache Audio 002s are priced at $22,500 per pair, including the bass amplifier and your choice of a variety of solid wood finishes. Next up, we have Legacy Audio. They introduced the AERIS XD Loudspeaker at Capital Audio Fest. There's so much interesting technology in this speaker, I probably can't do it justice, but I'll try. The AERIS has a powered bass system. We've heard about that before. They use two 12-inch woofers per speaker with a 750 watt Class D amplifier for each driver. So, to be clear, you have 1500 watts per channel for low frequencies. The remainder of the speaker is passive, with a 10-inch midwoofer, an 8-inch mid-range, a 4-inch AMT tweeter, and a 1-inch AMT super tweeter. If you think about it for a bit, those are rather large drivers for their assigned frequency bands, but Bill Duddleston, Legacy's chief engineer, is aiming for, you probably guessed it by now, a controlled directivity pattern. What is particularly interesting is that he's designing for a cardioid output pattern. Cardioid means the speaker output is mainly to the front and drops off to the sides and to the rear of the speaker. I mean, I'm imagining here that I'm the speaker, but anyway. I think the big point for spatial performance is the controlled directivity goal if you tie back to the Linkwitz thinking that I was mentioning before. Now, achieving cardioid radiation is tough. That's why it's not never done, but rarely done, especially with cones in a cabinet, as I described before. Duddleston has used driver size, side radiation, as with a dipole, and his not-so-secret weapon, which is DSP, digital signal processing. Legacy has long partnered with Bomer Audio to create time domain correction software. In the case of the AERIS XD and some of the other Legacy models, part of what the DSP software is doing is canceling the lateral and rear radiation from the speaker in areas where a pure acoustic approach is insufficient. Legacy also uses their DSP system to do some room correction in the bass because, as we've noted, bass is a big problem in real rooms. Duddleston showed me interesting measurements of bass wave propagation over time, and you can see in those charts that the timing of the bass arriving at the listener without DSP is, to put it mildly, wrong. Which means it's delayed relative to the input signal and delayed in a complex way. Unless, of course, it's corrected, likely in a complex way, a la DSP. On a track I know well from Shelby Lynn's Just a Little Lovin' album, the AERIS XD demonstrated a remarkable combination of bass power and detail. You actually sometimes get surprised by the degree to which, to cover up the room problems, especially in these smaller rooms, people simply set their speakers up for rolled off bass. I get it. You've got to make choices here. Now, in addition, touching on the last element of our trifecta of issues, the driver's legacy has chosen for the AERIS lead to high sensitivity. In this case, the sensitivity rating is 95 dB for the standard 2.83 volts at 1 meter. I don't know if this sensitivity is critical to dynamic realism, but it does seem to help. That help may simply be that realistic amplifiers can deliver high dynamic range. That is, the dynamics of sensitive speakers may not be something inherent to high sensitivity per se. To put it in perspective, I recently did a calculation that some low-efficiency speakers would require 4 kilowatts of power to produce certain dynamics that have been measured in concert halls. As I said then, not going to happen. Not going to happen in the real world. The AERIS XD is priced at $23,400 per pair, including a WaveLaunch DSP processor. You can upgrade to the full Wavelet 2 preamp crossover processor as well. The AERIS XD checks all the technical boxes, so I would very, very much like to hear it in residential surroundings with low background noise and ample time to explore a variety of music. Okay, let's cover my personal best of show demos. Now, for reasons I've touched on in part 1 and part 2 of this report, I don't like the best of show idea. It's illogical. At a show, rooms are different from each other. I mean, massively different. OEMs don't get to choose rooms sized properly for their equipment because rooms are chosen by historical precedent. Noise levels vary, and noise levels are almost always high, maybe 15 dB or more above what I measure in my listening room. Seating positions vary. My brain and ears vary based on what I just heard 5 minutes before. Sometimes the level is really high and you just haven't quite recovered. And I don't have time to hear the 100 or so tracks that I regularly use for reviewing. I also don't get to visit every room or anything like it. So what am I doing declaring best of show? Then there's another issue which, you're also probably going to hate, but this is rant time for Tom. There's the issue of what is best for you. I don't mean in some BS subjective sense. I mean in a fit-to-purpose sense. Is a Porsche 911 GT3 the best car? Well, is it the best off-roader? Come on, man. If you have a small room, is the XVX Chronosonic the best speaker? If you have a large room and low sensitivity speakers, is a 100-watt tube amp ideal? You get the idea. However, I understand that some people would like a sense of a winner. Football has a winner. Politics has a winner. So reminding you of all the issues I just rattled off, I'll climb off my high horse and pick 2 personal winners. First, let me talk about the Fidelity Imports room where they demoed the Q Acoustics 5050 speakers and the Unison Research Unico Nuovo Class A integrated. They also used an Ineos streamer. Potentially coming in at around $6,500 for the system, I like the sound and the price point. At a show where big, and expensive, is a draw. There aren't a lot of demos in this price category, I'll say understandably. But anyway, this system just sounded musical and seemed like an outstanding value that is approachable by a lot of people. As you might also guess, I was really impressed with the MBL room. The Absolute Sound has awarded similar MBL systems Best of Show in the past, so my choice is hardly insightful, but as a listener who prizes a sense of virtual reality, the MBL system goes as far in that direction as anything that I heard at this show. Okay, now back to our regularly scheduled sanity or insanity, depending on your interests and point of view. Let me do a simple summary of this rather long report. In my view, the industry is to be praised for a relentless pursuit of musical accuracy. In the last 15 years, progress in what would seem to be a mature field has taken off in meaningful and noticeable ways. This direction is perhaps more appealing to those with a connoisseur's mindset and a connoisseur's wallet, but it's an artistically motivated endeavor from talking to OEM after OEM, and one that I personally find admirable. At the same time, audio faces some challenges in advancing the state of the art. I think the Capital Audio Fest showed that work is being done in areas that might move the ball way downfield. And perhaps most positively, it showed that the massive historical recorded library of musical artistry is in a technological form that could be the backwards compatible platform for huge strides forward. I certainly hope so. Speaking of hope, I hope you enjoyed this video, or even better, found it stimulating. If you did, please subscribe, click on the notifications bell, check in the show notes for the URL that will give you a free subscription to our weekly newsletter, and of course, we would invite you to become a subscriber to the Absolute Sound magazine. We've been publishing it for 50 years, and it contains our flagship reviews. Thanks for joining us.